Okay, I think we're about ready. So I'd like to thank you all for being here. My name is Eugene Shirley, and I am with Pando Populus, which is one of the sponsors of this event. Pando Populus, if you have not heard of it before, it's for good reason, because we're a brand new organization. And we are pitching ourselves as the place where big ideas come down to earth, is the way we say it. And by big ideas, what we mean are the big philosophical ideas, religious ideas, those that have motivated cultures and civilizations through time. And by the earth, we mean the earth broadly conceived. And so we're talking about, issues of justice and peace, as well as our friend Wes Jackson would say, we're also concerned about the earth itself and as opposed to treating it just like dirt or something. And so that is the intersection where we work, big ideas in the earth. We are named for the largest and oldest organism on the planet, which is a tree or a grove of trees called Pando in Oregon. Some of us have just recently been out there. It's an 80,000-year-old grove, more than 100 acres large, and has managed to exist all this time because of a radical interconnection of the root system that has basically what it is just a giant root, which then sprouts up in all these various ways. And the reason why we named ourselves Pando after the tree, and then Populus because that's the genus for aspen, is because we thought that is a wonderful expression of the kind of interconnectedness that we all have, not only with each other, but with everything else around us. And so it's that statement of great interconnection that really Pando Populus is all about. We are, our inaugural conference is next year, June 4 to 7, 2015 in Claremont. John Cobb, who's going to be lecturing tonight, is the intellectual architect of the conference. And Pando actually came into existence in order to guide the educational outreach and the communications effort for that event. And this is the first pre-event prior to the conference. And we plan to have a number of events between now and the conference because it's going to be a big deal. 1,000 presenters, over 80 areas of specialty from 20 or 30 countries. It'll be the most ambitious event ever held on behalf of the planet. And this event tonight then is the first in a series of pre-events that will be leading up to there. Thanks very much once again to you all for coming out. Thank you to Pat and to MCC for hosting this, to Ed and the Gay Elder Circle for pulling all of this together. I will be around and would love to meet any of you and to talk with you about what Pando Populus is doing. We aim to be the indispensable platform at this intersection of big ideas in the earth. We are looking for people who can help us move this forward and to be able to galvanize around this core issue. We will be passing around some sign-up sheets and that kind of thing, and so I hope that you will give us your email address and that you'll also be in contact with me afterwards. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Eugene. We are so delighted, Founders Metropolitan Community Church, to be able to be the host location for this event. When Ed Hansen came to us and said, do you think we can do this? We jumped on the opportunity. We did so for a number of reasons, not the least of which is caring for the earth in all of her manifestations is something we believe deeply in. For years, we've been teaching series, Going Green with God, and then some. For us, being a faith institution, we believe that most of the issues have some type of a spiritual component to it. And a lot of what we do here at this particular church is to take some of those, what we sometimes call toxic religion and toxic theology, and really look at it and say, is there something better in here than what we've been taught? We believe that there is on many things. Sometimes folks have said, oh, MCC, it's just that gay church. Oh, nah. We are a church for all people, no matter one's orientation, and we are not centered just on sexual orientation, but indeed on creation in all of its being. The earth is something that we know is the sustainer of much of what we do, and all of us are gathered here today from incredible organizations, and we won't have anything to do if there's no earth, there's no people, there's no air to breathe anymore. But oftentimes people say, the end is near, we can't do anything to make it better, and I just say that's phooey. Because I believe as long as we're still breathing, as long as we're still living, we have an opportunity to make a difference. And so on behalf of Founders MCC, I welcome you here. I'm Reverend Pat Langlois. I'm one of the associate pastors here, by the way. I do have just a few pieces of information for you. As you know, we are a techno-driven world. We spoke this morning about wisdom, and we have all these smartphones, but aren't always wise. But take your smartphone out, or anything that will make a noise, get on Facebook, tell the world you're here, and then just put it on silent. You don't need to turn it off. Just put it on silent is the only thing that we ask. So go ahead and do that. We also have, after the talk, we're going to be having a reception in the courtyard. You can simply go out that door and down. We'll have cookies, refreshments, coffee, and such. And we also have some great literature from the different organizations. There's a lot more about Pando that you can pick up, about the Gay Elder Circle, about MCC. One of the things that we have out there for MCC are things such as mindful eating as a spiritual discipline, part of some of the teachings we've done, handbook, if you will, on right living. And the beginning of it, one of the beginnings, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. So, and how it is that we live our life. So there's some things out there. We are out of any of those handouts, because I did not make a lot of them, because we're trying to, of course, be conscious about saving the trees and saving paper. We have a list out there. You can sign up, and we can email it to you. So if you would like that, we definitely want to get information to you without wasting our resources. There's two of these in the back, and there's this here. We're going to pass this around. This is what Eugene was talking about, to let us know if you would like to receive more information about the conference coming up. We also plan to be sending out e-newsletters over the course of the next few months of next steps that you can do in your communities to spread the word of what is spoken of here today. And lastly, probably one of the most important things, restrooms are located. If you go out those doors right there, there's a little room to the right. There's a restroom in there. You go up the stairs, the first set of stairs, there's restrooms there. When you go in the courtyard, the same. So we'll make sure you're taken care of. So with that, if you have any questions after the talk about the facilities, you can ask me and we can point you in the right direction. And before John comes up and speaks, I'm going to invite Ed to come forward. Ed is an incredible man who I've had the honor to know from afar. Sometimes we've worked on projects, and I said when he called, I was so excited to have an opportunity to work with him on something near and dear to all of our hearts. So with that, Ed Hansen.
Thank you. I'm Ed Hansen, and current president of the Gay Elder Circle. A number of us are here from the Gay Elder Circle, and it's good to see these brothers who are present with us. And we are, as a Gay Elder Circle, very happy to be one of the co-sponsors of this event tonight. As gay elders in the community, we are concerned about the health and well-being of the community and want to call attention to anything that threatens the well-being of our community, and also to call attention to that which is something good and positive in the community. And certainly today we're very aware of the threat that is there for all of us related to life on planet Earth. And so it's a great privilege for me this evening to introduce our speaker, Dr. John Cobb. I've known him for nearly 50 years. You see, Dr. John Cobb was one of my professors when I was a student at the Claremont School of Theology from 1962 to 1967. He was the one who introduced me to more critical thinking related to Christian theology. And he also encouraged me by serving on my dissertation committee when I wrote on my dissertation on a very controversial topic. The title was The Church's Ministry with Homosexuals. And back in 1967, that was sort of a new kind of a topic. But for tonight's purposes, however, I think what you need to know about Dr. Cobb is that he has consistently, for decades, used his intellect and insight to advocate for a perspective or a philosophy of life that promotes the common good for all people and for all life on planet Earth. He's the author of over 50 books. In 1971, one of those books that he wrote was titled, Is It Too Late? The first single-author book to pioneer the intersection of philosophy, religion, and the environment. Dr. Cobb is also extensively cited in Daniel T. Spencer's book, Gay and Gia, Ethics, Ecology, and the Erotic. So for a professor, philosopher, theologian, environmentalist to be quoted in Dan Spencer's book, I think is a very great honor that he is listed there and is talked about so often and cited so frequently. Spencer is suggesting, and writing as himself a gay man, that we as an LGBTQ community need to reclaim our power as those who have survived oppression and now hope to thrive in equality as residents of planet Earth. And Spencer made another point. He said, doing this entails recognizing a broader interrelationship and reconnection with others. In other words, we are encouraged to take our place as LGBTQ people alongside others to help save planet Earth and to see the connections that we have with one another and with all of life. So, as another student of John Cobb's has stated, our friend Eugene Shirley that spoke just a moment ago, there may be a connection between those who have run roughshod over us as LGBTQ people and those who continue to run roughshod over the life-giving and vital energies of planet Earth. As an LGBTQ community, we have challenged those who would deny us. In the face of those who would run roughshod over the energies of the earth, perhaps now we can turn our attention to the goal of creating a thriving biosphere. So Dr. John Cobb will help us consider this possibility as he speaks with us now. So please help me welcome Dr. John Cobb.
I'm really pleased to have this chance to be with you, and I'm especially pleased to be asked to talk about what is most on my own mind and heart these days, and that is making one more effort to make a difference with respect to what I consider the most serious problems that we all face together, that is the survival of the human species. And I think it is a genuinely serious issue, not simply a fanciful one. I'm also particularly happy to be talking here in the presence of my two main teachers with respect to issues of gender and sexuality. One of the great advantages of being a professor and having the chance to work with graduate students. I don't mean that undergraduates are not sometimes equally capable of teaching their professors, but graduate students certainly teach their professors as much as their professors teach them. That's what they're expected to do. And when they write theses and dissertations, they don't just write something the professor already knows. That would not warrant passing such a document. They are teaching. And I'm very blessed that Ignacio Castuera and Ed Hansen were among my students. Ignacio Castuera wrote a dissertation on gender issues well before the feminists were raising them clearly in the theological context. Obviously, they've been raised for millennia, so I have to be careful how I state that. But he was fascinated by the fact that in Mexico, where he had grown up, both the pre-Spanish people, I suppose primarily the Aztecs, and the Spanish Catholics had cultures in which the religious devotion centered on a woman or female, a goddess would be the best way to say it, I guess. And yet, in practice, both of them were highly patriarchal and actually treated women very badly. Why would you worship the female and then treat the actual female in a disparaging and oppressive way? Well, anyway, it's a fascinating topic for me and raised the whole issue of gender in relation to theology in a way that I had been oblivious of prior to that time. And then Ed has already told you that he wrote a paper which dealt with a question that was, again, totally new to me. The idea that people of different gender orientations required attention in different ways by the church. It's an obvious point, but the fact that something is obvious doesn't mean you notice it until somebody points it out. And I'm very much indebted to him for having educated me. I think he'd spent a year in Haight-Ashbury, and obviously he was dealing with a lot of people who needed very special attention in terms of ministry, and I have not forgotten that or been indifferent to it, certainly, since he wrote. And then going back to Ignacio, he introduced me to Latin American liberation theology, which I think is one of the really great theological movements of this past 50-year period. And I appreciate that very much. And he taught me through that my whole approach to the global economy was a mistaken approach. And that shift has been very important in shaping my whole worldview and understanding of things since then. But then after I thought he was in unique position to give leadership in the interpretation of Latin American liberation theology in the United States, he began giving primary attention to the gay issue. And I said, Nacho, come on now, you can't do everything. You've got enough on your plate. He said, well, as a liberation theologian, my interest is in the most oppressed people. And it startled me to think, but that, I believe, is probably true. The oppression of sexually differently oriented people has gone deeper than any other oppression because it goes right into the family itself. And he was perceptive about such matters. And I immediately thought of the way in which so many people had opposed Martin Luther King's decision to take on the Vietnam War as a major issue. But of course, King was right and the critics were wrong. So I really want to give my deep appreciation to both of them for having opened my eyes to things. I hope eventually they would have been opened, but they were opened a little earlier than most theologians' eyes were opened, and I'm grateful for that too. It's too bad to wait till everybody else knows something before you know it. Now, I think that gay people should be particularly easy to persuade of a very fundamental assumption about the conference that we are having. What is distinctive about the conference is that we are not making our focus on the specific things we need to do. We'll certainly be talking about that a lot. But we will be talking about the basic assumptions that underlie the mistakes we're now making and the changes in basic assumptions that would cause us, or at least allow us, encourage us to make healthy moves instead of the continuing destructive ones that now characterize our situation. It seems to me that was clearly true in respect to gender and sexual issues. There were deeply entrenched theories about male-female relations. There were deeply entrenched theories about heterosexuality and homosexuality and so forth. And people who sincerely adopted those other theories often thought they were doing the right thing. It was not a moral issue in the sense of just getting people to do what they really already knew was right. It was a matter of changing what they understood to be right and wrong. And that depends upon the nature of reality. And until you've changed your understanding of the nature of reality, much of your best intentioned work will still be destructive. Truth is very important. Understanding reality correctly is very important. And I learned back in my graduate school days that the way in which our dominant institutions, especially the university, but all the institutions of political and economic life and so forth, are based on fundamentally mistaken assumptions. Now that's a very harsh thing to say, but I think the fact that we are driving 60 miles an hour toward a river where the bridge is already broken is an indication something very fundamental is wrong. Now, there's an enormous amount of excellent work being done in all sorts of fields, and excellent thinking being done that is healthy and desirable. But there is not enough attention paid to the fact that all of that depends on a different set of assumptions from the ones that still rule the culture that we are in. So I would like to spend a few minutes with you, at least telling you how I see the assumptions that rule our culture. And I'm going to focus on higher education because it's the assumptions in higher education that illustrate and that play an enormous role in shaping the broader assumptions of society. You see, who do we mean by an expert in any field today? Usually we mean someone who has specialized in that field in school, probably gotten a PhD, is highly regarded by other people in that field, and that means someone who has been socialized into thinking in a particular way in a graduate program, almost always. I will illustrate this from my recent efforts in China. I have the extraordinary experience in late life, I won't go into the details of that, but of having a status in China that enables me to make some possible difference, which I don't have in the United States, except in the very indirect ways in which I'm now approaching matters. But China, after it had given up on being Is it okay? Ideologically Marxist, and that means the Cultural Revolution had led to a major backlash against the assumptions that had guided that. The government became pragmatic. It continued, of course, to be the Communist Party, and the Communist Party cares immensely about its own success and maintaining its power, but it doesn't really care much about any particular ideology any longer. So they sent their graduates, their potential leadership, intellectual, scholarly leadership, to the United States, which they regarded as the most advanced country in the world. And many of them studied in the schools of agriculture. And so they became experts in agriculture, and then they went back and they've established a score of huge universities in agricultural science. And they are all staffed by people who were educated in our schools of agriculture. Okay, if you're educated in an American school of agriculture, what do you think about? Do you think about organic farming? No, that's not even a consideration. I mean, you learn quickly why to dismiss it, of course, but do you learn about how small peasant villages can be improved in the quality of life? No, you learn about bulldozing them down so that you can have bigger farms. I won't go into the details, but I think you understand what I mean. Since World War II, we have wiped out most of our rural agricultural population and have replaced it by huge industrial farms, which are highly dependent upon fossil fuels, and which, of course, alienate even the farmer from the land in a way that did not previously exist in the rural area. In other words, urban attitudes now totally dominate the culture. In my view, for China to follow the advice of all of its experts, who reflect all of our experts, is utterly disastrous for the human race. It means 500 million more people moving into industrial activities in the city. 500 million is more than the total population of North America and South America, I think. So we're not talking about something minor. It means that the dependence upon fossil fuels will be greatly increased. It means that nobody will know enough about the land to make the adjustments needed as water becomes extremely scarce. I could go on and on. Even if none of that were true, I would still think China will be a much healthier society if it devotes its efforts to improving the quality of life in the villages and the quality of their farming, developing the best techniques for organic farming. To me, that is much more promising for the people of China, and it's much more hopeful for the future of the planet. Since China had not yet made that decision, we are working very hard on that, and I'm more hopeful than I was 2 weeks ago, before I just came back from China, that it will go in a better direction than I had feared. Okay, that's a kind of aside, but you understand my feeling that experts give the wrong advice is not a casual one about some peripheral matter. It deals with the very heart of the matter. And I think you can understand there is a connection between why they give that kind of advice and why people who were sexually different were treated in oppressive ways. But it's not a one-to-one issue. These specific assumptions that guide education, that guide thought about agriculture in American universities are not exactly the same. Both of them have a certain, what shall I say, alienation from the natural. Both of them want to impose homogeneous concepts upon what is not homogeneous. So there are many analogies. But I want to clarify why the American university in general does so much more harm than good in the world at the present time. It's because of how it got its assumptions, how it got stuck in those assumptions, what those assumptions are. And I hope if you will agree with me on that, you will agree that it's worthwhile trying to have a conference that points out these problems and proposes a better set of assumptions that might lead to more creative and wholesome work in the world. Okay, so I'm going to give you a very brief history of modern Western thought. And for some of you, this is just old hat, but for many of you, it may be a little hard to follow. And I'm sorry about that, and I hope we'll have a chance for discussion. I'll try to clarify things if they are not clear. Modern science and modern philosophy tend to look back to Descartes. He's often called the father of modern philosophy, and it is the understanding of nature that he proposed that came to dominate the Western mind. So I'm just going to use the word Cartesian frequently, and I need to tell you what I mean by Cartesian. What the content of Descartes' thought was. Descartes' understanding of nature was a reaction against the Aristotelian understanding of nature that dominated the science of the late Middle Ages. Aristotle was rediscovered through the Moors, and by the 15th century, he was the philosopher in Europe. And Aristotle encouraged scientists to, for example, if they are studying biological matters, to understand what the function of something was. To put it crudely, scientists understood that the function of the heart was to pump blood, and they knew the reason you needed to have the blood pumped was such and such and such and such. And they could tell you a lot about that kind of thing, and that was considered good science. If they came across something in the human body and they couldn't figure out what its function was, they would do their best to continue experimenting and studying until they found out what its function was. In Aristotle's philosophy, this is called a final cause. So they were seeking final causes, that's purposes, goals, and so forth. And real scientific advance took place. Nevertheless, Descartes turned out certainly to be right in saying that is not the deepest science. The deeper science is to find out how the heart pumps. What are the mechanisms that are operative in the heart that causes it to pump? And he said, science has no interest in final causes. Its interest is only in efficient causes. And efficient causes is what has come to be almost what everybody hears when they hear the word cause. The other things that Aristotle called causes, we use some, we might say explanations or something like that. But cause, for us, because of the way in which Descartes pointed us, largely means an efficient cause. Now, if science deals only with efficient causes and believes that everything can be explained by efficient causes, you will end up with a mechanistic view. And Descartes understood that. And the kind of symbol, see, we want to use Pando Populus as a kind of symbol of the reality we're proclaiming. The symbol that was dominant in the Cartesian world was the Strasbourg clock. Now, it's not the clock itself. Of course, the clock operated by clockwork, and the medievals people were very good technology, the kind of technology that you need to make a very fine clock. But they, in addition to the clock itself and its telling time, every hour some figures would come out that looked like human beings dressed in various ways, and they would dance around the clock. You've probably seen something like that along the way. Well, the point of using that as the example is to say mechanisms operating exclusively materially by efficient causes can act just the way we expect living things to act. Okay, so living things in the Cartesian worldview are understood as complicated machines. Now, you see what gets left out in all this is anything like a subject. An animal is not a subject. An animal is a machine that makes sounds that sound like maybe it's in pain, but that doesn't mean there's anything subjective. But pain that's not subjective is not pain. So an idea like pain is dropped altogether. Or animals might seem to be operating purposively, that is, they want some food, but it turns out actually you can explain their behavior entirely by mechanisms. So you understand this is a very radical metaphysics. It is a metaphysics. I know people don't like that word, but it's inescapable. The big ideas are metaphysical ideas. They're the ones that really shape the way society operates. Okay, so this is a metaphysics that tells us that, in fact, nature is a very, very complicated machine, and the only way in which science should operate is to increasingly explain the mechanisms which make up this huge mechanism. Okay, that's the mechanistic worldview. It's often called the Newtonian worldview, and that's a very interesting development, but the reason for that is that at the time Descartes wrote, there were other forms of activity that people thought were scientific. And Newton himself spent a great deal of time as an alchemist. You've probably heard of alchemy. Alchemists actually turned into chemists. But nevertheless, their way of understanding reality was quite different from this mechanical view. And Newton started out his career that way, but the laws of motion that he discovered, they fit the Cartesian model. And they were overwhelmingly important in the minds of people of that time. And he joined the Royal Society, which was committed to advancing the mechanistic view over against the others. And since then, the other forms of science almost disappeared, and the Cartesian view became overwhelmingly the dominant view in the West. Okay, so that's step number one. I think it was a serious mistake, but certainly an understandable one. I hope you understand I'm not saying these were vicious people who were intending to destroy something. They were extremely perceptive thinkers who actually pointed in a direction that had made enormous gains in the field of understanding the world. There's no question about that. I do not myself believe they were correct, that living things are simply mechanisms. I do not believe they were correct in excluding the subject from reality or saying it had no causal effect. Now, in Descartes' case, and for everybody from the time of Descartes to the time of Darwin, it was assumed, or almost everybody. I catch myself making generalizations that obviously you'll find some exception, but the culture as a whole assumed a dualistic stance. Descartes did not think that his I was a machine. He thought, you probably have heard his point that I think, therefore I am. The thinker was not a machine for him. The thinker was a psychological, spiritual being, a soul. And it was even very important to him that he could prove that the soul was immortal. So I hope you don't hear me saying Descartes was a materialist. He was a dualist. But our interest now is his view of nature. And the reason for that is that his view of nature won out over its first great competitor. Now, this great competitor came when Darwin showed that human beings are part of nature. Now, a lot of people, and I'm one of them, although of course I came along much later, so I don't fit this, but thought, if human beings are part of nature, then nature is not just a big machine. Nature has thought in it. Nature has purposes in it. And this thinking and these purposes have an effect on what happens in the natural world. Now, I believe that. I think almost everybody believes it, but it is heresy in the university. Now, there was a generation in which a very serious discussion of this issue was prominent. This was a period in the late 19th century and the early 20th century. And during that period, there were people in many countries who achieved great fame and much reputation for talking about a new naturalism, a neo-naturalism, if you want that term. When I went to Chicago to the divinity school, all my professors called themselves neo-naturalists. They thought that we had a wonderful opportunity now to get rid of dualism, and also you understand the dualism is between the natural and what is not natural. So supernaturalism was almost necessary if you thought of nature that way. But they said, we're very glad to get rid of supernaturalism. What we want is a rich, realistic naturalism, and then we'll understand that the values that religious people are concerned about are part of the natural world. In some sense, God also is part of the natural world. That was the direction of the faculty I studied with. And they were very interested in the many scientists who wanted to explore nature as being something different from what it had been thought to be and what people were being taught in the universities. Now, what I'm interested in is recovery of that question and looking again at the answers to that question that got obscured. So I'll first talk about what happened. Liberal arts colleges were very interested. I mean, liberal arts are humanistic. And humanistic people, some of them may have opposed the idea that human beings are part of nature. That would be one possible response. But most of them accepted the new scientific discoveries and would say, yes, human beings are part of nature. Now we need a richer view of nature, and so forth and so on. So as long as the dominant form of education, of higher education, were liberal arts, this shift in the thinking of nature had a real chance of success. There were a lot of people who were interested in it. But about that same time, a different understanding of the university came into being. It was already started in Germany in the early 19th century, and it was spreading to other parts of the world. And this was that the university's task was to prepare people to be researchers. frequently, even today, if you'll just remember, when you hear the great universities describe themselves, they almost always call themselves research universities. Okay, how do you prepare people to be researchers? Well, you slice up reality into manageable bits. Often you slice the bits into still more manageable bits, but we don't need to go into that endless division that tends to go on. And then you give independence to those researchers who study those manageable bits. And they work out what the most effective methods are for advancing the amount of knowledge we have in those manageable bits. And what they come up with are called academic disciplines. And of course, each academic discipline has a department. Now, once you get an academic discipline established, you establish the right method of doing research in a particular field, and you have the assumptions that have been part of the development of this whole understanding. And it is not characteristic of an academic discipline that it studies its own history or its own assumptions. It's very rare. Now, that means that assumptions that may have been reasonably sensible assumptions for the purpose of research at an earlier point are enthroned, encased, established, and not re-examined, even when the context and situation is very different. It also means that any data, information that cannot be dealt with by those methods is just sort of denied. It doesn't exist. Okay. You may think I'm exaggerating, but let me give you the most important example is economics. And if I tie it into what I said before, the reason agriculturalists teach what they teach is because of agricultural economics, and because agricultural economics is the application of economic theory in the field of agriculture. But economists have more status than anybody else. You know, a Nobel Prize is given in economics, not in any other social science or anything else outside the natural sciences. And other departments of the university greatly envy the economists because they are a science. The rest of them are having trouble being fully scientific. So they imitate them. Okay. So let me just explain a little bit about economics, and then you will understand why assumptions are so important. Okay. Economics came into being, what we call economics today. I mean, what is taught in departments of economics, especially at the best universities and in the best graduate schools, is an academic discipline. They frequently say they go back to Adam Smith, but they treat Adam Smith rather selectively. So, but they have abstracted a few very fundamental principles. They have a particular view of human beings. It's called Homo economicus. And Homo economicus is an individual human being whose only relevant interests are acquiring goods and possessions, a maximum amount of goods and possessions, for as little work as possible. This is what the economic man is. Now, in one sense, all economists know that, of course, there's more to human beings than that. But they have been trained to think that's all that an economist should pay attention to, and that that's all that's relevant to the economic activities of people. Now, this development took place during the time of industrialization. And industry was able to demonstrate that by organizing labor in a particular way, the same number of people in a fewer number of hours could produce more goods. There's no question but that's true. And if the goal is to produce as much as possible for as little work as possible, then industry, factories are the way of doing it. And they're right. I hope I'm not criticizing that. I mean, I criticize it from another point of view, but not internally. They also noticed that whenever there is a transaction in the marketplace, both the buyer and the seller think they are better off than they were before the transaction, or they wouldn't perform the transaction. So markets are inherently ways of satisfying the needs of multiple people, and they can show that a free market does this in the best possible way, and free markets therefore should not be discouraged. So, given that vision of the world, they developed a system, the one goal of which is growth as measured by market activity. The more market activity there is, the better. And to this day, the goal of increasing market activity is the major goal of most of the governments of the world. I can't say all. I'm very glad to say that Bhutan has said they're after gross national happiness rather than gross national product. In my view, much more sensible than the rest of the world, but Bhutan is hardly the most influential country in the world. So the vast majority of governments with this minor qualifications are dedicated to this business of growth, okay? All of that made considerable sense in the 18th century, and that's when these assumptions were made. But as you see what's left out, human community plays no role whatsoever. Nature plays only the role of providing the resources. There is no reflection about the limitation of resources or the consequence of using those resources. There is no reflection about anything like pollution. And to this day, if you ask about these questions, economists will try to work them back into their system, and they will not allow you to challenge the idea that the more growth, the better. But today we live in a planet where we are already consuming goods faster than the planet can reproduce them. We're already living at an unsustainable level of production. It's not healthy to have a university that is totally devoted to increasing just what is destroying us. But we have that, and we have it because of assumptions. Okay, so I'm saying there's two steps in the assumption. One is the Cartesian view of nature, and second, the view that the methods applicable to the non-human world are also applicable in the human world. And we are, in fact, all zombies. Now, universities never announce that all their students and all their faculty are zombies, but in fact, that's what they teach. Nobody believes it. Now, it's because nobody believes the truth of what the university teaches that I think it might possibly be time to change. I mean, that there might be a possible to generate some reflection about all of this. Okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, of course, I personally have been making my polemical statements for a long time, but I'm hoping, it's a bold hope, and I'm not predicting, but I'm hoping that by bringing together people in many, many fields who are not bound to this restrictive, reductionistic, mechanistic worldview, but are doing thinking that breaks out of that and does so in ways that are relevant to the actual needs of human beings on this planet and of the biosphere and so forth and so on, bringing together people from many fields who are already doing that and showing that the big problem of making this kind of thinking dominant is that there's resistance from those who are operating out of a different set of assumptions. We might generate a kind of community of opposition. And I believe that the alternate assumptions have been well worked out. Now, I'll bring in the name of Alfred North Whitehead since it's so important to me. He was by no means the only person who was moving in what I consider sensible direction. There were many people who said, we need to rethink nature. Perhaps the most influential was Henri Bergson in France. But William James was very influential at one time in the United States, Charles Saunders Peirce, John Dewey. I could go on and list other names, some of which you would be familiar with. So I'm trying to bring together the heirs of all of these movements, and then I think the ecological movement generated a whole new set of people who were dissatisfied with the dominant viewpoint. If we all recognize we have a common interest in overcoming the stranglehold of Cartesian thinking about nature with all of its ramifications, it might be that we would find that it is possible to undermine what is wrong about the contemporary university and culture. I'm singling out the university because it's so clear there. But the bureaucratic structures reflect, in government, reflect the departmental structures in universities and so forth. Okay, so that's what the conference is aiming to. Now, how do we do it? We'll discuss a great many different topics, and in the individual discussions, you don't have to say anything about Whitehead. My view is that the people who will be gathered will be thinking in terms that are in fact congruent with Whitehead's terms. I think an awful lot of people, for example, recognize that the very individualistic ways in which we have come to think that leave out concern for community altogether are not true. It's not the way we are. We really are parts of communities. We are related to each other internally. And I think that shows up in the way a lot of topics are being approached by a lot of thoughtful people. Well, Whitehead gives a metaphysical explanation of that. And so Whitehead's presence for me is very important, and I hope more and more people will say, well, yes, I don't plan to study Whitehead, but if Whitehead is congenial with what I'm convinced of from having studied somebody else, I'm certainly not going to oppose it. Now, the reason none of the others are as adequate as Whitehead is that I don't think any of the others dealt with physics. And physics is the cornerstone of Cartesian thinking. If you don't overthrow Cartesian thinking in physics, it's going to be hard to change the many other disciplines that so admire and envy physics. People talk about physics envy. You will understand the meaning of a term like that. Fortunately, within physics, the Cartesian model no longer works. There's great resistance in physics to paying serious attention to what doesn't fit their model, and they have thus far managed to ignore it for most purposes. But physics used to be based on the assumption that the whole world consisted of little bits of matter. And now we know it doesn't. Well, at some point, that ought to lead to rethinking the whole system that's built on it. And quantum theory, of course, is recognized. And nobody supposes that quantum theory can be fit into the Cartesian paradigm. So it is just dismissed as anomalous. I think that's cheating. you can't really go on forever with a physics that dismisses its most foundational inquiries as simply anomalous. So I think we have a chance in the field of physics, maybe a good chance. There are more quantum theorists interested in Whitehead than there are probably people in any of the other fields that we'll treat. So we have a foothold, a toehold anyway, in order to make change. So I want you just to, I'm not going to try to teach you Whitehead, I'm just trying to say there are reasons for taking Whitehead seriously as the best chance to achieve a comprehensive alternative to the comprehensive alternative that Cartesian thought has offered in the past. And I want everybody to know that's what I'm coming from, but whether you want to get involved at that level is not what we are demanding in order to be a participant in the conference. If you can contribute to theories of education that are not Cartesian, but really emphasize the interconnectedness of human people, the importance of the subjective experience that students have in a classroom, et cetera, you're already with us. And we want you to be there, and we want you to help us. Or in any other field, I would make a similar kind of statement. I was going to say something in conclusion about why Pando-Populus, but I think Ed has already said it. It's a symbol of a living organism. And from my point of view, the world is made up of organisms, not of machines. A quantum phenomenon is much more like an organism than it is like a machine, or a lump of matter that would be part of a machine. And of course, a stone is not a living thing, but if you analyze it far enough, you come to something that is not inert and just there. So if the world is, in Thomas Berry's words, a community of subjects rather than simply a collection of objects. And if we could get that idea in the minds of people, we could transform the way government operates, education operates, ecological thinking operates, even economics operates. So that's my ambitious goal. If you can help us in any way, that we will be most grateful for that. Thank you.
We have an opportunity to ask John some questions, and do we have the microphone somewhere? Yes. Okay, Bill and John over here are going to be passing the microphones around, so if you would just raise your hands. I do want to also let you know that this evening has been filmed. It will be up on our website, but you can get the website as you leave or ask me, and we will also be connecting it to Pando's as well. So tonight, if you didn't catch everything that was spoken of, he'll be sharing more of it. You can catch it on the web. So with that, if you could raise your hand, and we'll entertain some questions. Yeah.
This is a little bit more of sort of a comment or an observation, but I think one of the interesting things about gays and lesbians focusing on this issue is that I think that the LGBT community has often played the role of being a helper, not traditionally having children, and that kind of family commitment has often given gays and lesbians an ability to help with other people in their family, and there's genetic, evolutionary good reasons for that. But there's a parallel thing. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about a book that a friend of mine had recommended, and it is A Passion to Preserve Gay Men as Keepers of Culture. And this is about gay men that go around restoring old, broken down homes San Francisco being one of the great examples of that. There's a little article that says, gay men have long been attracted, and gay men and lesbians, I'm sorry, that's what it says, have long been attracted to refurbishing that which is broken, neglected, or abandoned to states of wholeness. And I think that there's a kind of a personal economy in taking care of those. If you don't have your own children, and you still have the resources and the impetus to taking care of those within your own family, and then obviously bringing out to the community as well. So I think that there's examples of this in many ways, and I think it may even be genetic.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm sorry that I was having trouble understanding everything you said, but I think I understood enough to say I do not believe that all of our economic activities are in fact understandable in terms of the model that economists use. I think almost everybody is concerned for a wider community than simply himself as an individual or even the nuclear family, which sometimes economists will kind of slip over the difference between the individual and the family unit. And once you are genuinely concerned about others, then community becomes a part of the shaping of your economic life as well as everything else. Excuse me.
So the question is, what do you see as an alternative economic system that basically, instead of depleting the resources of the planet, actually nurtures the planet and every living, being in the planet? So what would be, if you can give us the contours or some sense of what an economic, like a planet-friendly economic system would look like?
I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why I'm having the problem, but if you would repeat it now without the microphone, I think I'd understand you better.
In your view, what would be an economic system that would be friendly to the planet?
Oh, okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Well, many years ago, I wrote a book together with Herman Daly, which the title we had in mind was Economics for Community. Now, Herman Daly had been, he had his PhD in economics, but he had rebelled against the idea that the goal of economics is simply economic growth. He thought economics should be reflecting about how to order our economic life in a way that would be good for human beings and also for the wider environment. Now, our book the title got changed from Economics for Community to The Common Good. But it's still about that whole issue. Now, he, of course, has devoted his whole life to this economics issue, and there is now a community not tolerated much in the university, but outside the university and with people teaching in a few colleges, you understand. I mean, which is called ecological economics. And I think you would find, there's a big book about 400 pages that is the textbook on ecological economics. But it's simply a matter, you start at a different place. You ask, what is needed by the community as a whole? How can we order our economic life so as to meet those needs? And it's perfectly possible to do research and to do study and come up with answers. So if you just want some terms tossed out that would be familiar, I think most people in ecological economics would recommend cooperatives as a very good way of organizing the community for a healthier life. They would also accent the independence of local community from wider systems, so that the more food is produced in accessible distance from you, the fresher the food that you will eat, and the more food security you will have when there are disasters and so forth. So there are very specific differences at the very practical level, as well as a fundamental difference in the theoretical structure. You're not aiming at growth, you are aiming at the upbuilding of human community in the context of a healthy biosphere. And that means you will make your judgments about what is economically wise and what the economic policies should be in an entirely different way from what has been operative so far. So, if afterwards you'd really like to discuss this with me in more detail, I could go on a long time.
What will be the main mechanism to change? I mean, there's huge power, influence, interest
Yes.
among the establishment.
Oh, sure.
I feel totally impotent when it comes to these kinds of changes.
Yes.
What will create this change?
Yes.
You are the agents
Sure,
of change.
sure. No. Here, I think he's just pointing out that, okay, so you change the way people think. You've still got a power structure with enormous self-interest and concern to retain its power, and we can't even make majority opinions heard in Congress anymore, and so forth and so on. I mean, you're completely correct. No, the one thing that that one lever, I mean, there are many levers, and no one of them is going to make the difference. But up until now, the power structure has been able to appeal to the experts in its support. And that has been important in maintaining its power. And if we can expose the experts as not in fact knowing what they're talking about, and that is my view of most experts, their use. If you look at even the boards that run many corporations, they include university professors. And they are encouraging them to go ahead and do whatever it is they need to do in order to grow. Now, some of it is sheer corruption. That is, they're doing it because that's where the money lies. But some of it is because their academic disciplines support them in doing it. All I'm talking about at the moment is how to remove that level of support from a corrupt system. The system will not fall the next day because it's shown that the emperor has no clothes on. But nevertheless, it's somewhat embarrassing to the emperor for his nakedness to be exposed. And I would feel pretty good if I could just do that much. And I do think, but if you ask what's going to happen, we are in for many catastrophes. They are now unavoidable. And among them will probably be financial catastrophes. That may happen rather soon. And we'll all suffer. So I don't want to, when you ask what's going to happen, I think it's important to be realistic, and we're all going to have problems figuring out how to live. My income is almost entirely based on the financial system, because I don't get paid for anything I do. Okay. And if the financial system collapses, it's going to be very painful. But nevertheless, what we need to think about is what can be built up when the financial system collapses. And the collapse of the financial system will mean that, the banks will try to get the government to bail them out again, the way they did successfully last time. And maybe they'll succeed. But then they'll go on and do the same thing again. Eventually, they won't succeed. Well, it's when that happens that something new will emerge. I think to have thought through what would be a good emergent would be an advantage rather than just supposing there is no alternative. It's the there is no alternative line that I would like to fundamentally challenge. There is an alternative. But the fact that there is an alternative doesn't mean that the people who like the present alternative are going to yield easily. So you're completely right in pointing to the problem. But what is unsustainable will not last very long. And the present system is radically unsustainable. That means it won't last.
Have you any experience with or any opinion on the Venus Project by Jacques Fresca?
Say the
Florida?
Venus, did you say
the Venus Project? It's economic-based economy. It's resource-based economy.
Resource-based economy. I don't know enough about it to make a wise comment, but there are many people who are recognizing that we need to think in a different way. And I think that project, like many, actually calls for moving toward local economies rather than dependence upon a global economy. And it's the sort of thing I would like to have seriously considered at the conference, you understand. So, yeah. By the way, local economy, one of the very important things that I've only been aware of in the last decade is that local economies can function financially independent of the global economy. We can produce our own money. You don't have to have a national government to produce the money. State governments could create their own money. A county could create its own money. And when the larger system collapses, it will be very good if we all know that we can work out a system that would enable us to exchange and all that kind of thing without money issued by the private banks. You understand, one of the reasons for the extreme trouble that we now are in is that our government has no control over money. It's all controlled by the banks. The Federal Reserve is not a government institution. The Federal Reserve controls the government. The government doesn't control the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is run by the banks, the private banks. So if one thing that can be done even now, if you just change your way of thinking, is to encourage states to develop their own banks. We could do away with the debt, you see, of the state of California simply by creating our own bank. Now, you could imagine that there are people who don't want us to do that. So, as you say, these things are very difficult to do. South Dakota has its own bank, and it has no debt and no financial problems. The other 49 states all have debts and financial problems.
Are you hearing anything about, now that some basic issues for LGBT people, like freedom to marry, gays in the military, basic legal rights, now that some of those battles have been won successfully, do you think that or are you hearing that there's a sense that the time is right now for people to turn away from these internal struggles to now take their energies and move them toward the outer environment?
Well, that of course is what I'm hoping is going to happen. I don't mean you stop thinking about the internal problems, but when you've gotten to a certain point. If we take the whole problem of gender, I think in many, many circles, women really are no longer at a significant disadvantage. I don't think, I mean, there are places that work still needs to be done. I'm not trying to say all problems are solved, but a great many women can give their attention to other things, and women are giving leadership in ecological matters, for example. Unfortunately, we managed to get women's studies into many universities, but as one of the sharpest feminist thinkers has pointed out, they have been killed in their original purpose by what she called methodicide. That is, once you're in the university, you're likely to want to do a good job by the standards of the university. Okay. So if women allow themselves to be co-opted into the existing value system, it doesn't help to have women in places of equality. If they can hold on to their feminist ideals and still function in places of importance, then we have great optimism. But thus far, electing women to high office has not had any positive effect. And I'm just using this as an example. It's somewhat similar with ecology. We have departments of ecology in universities, but they don't talk about what needs to be done in order to save the world. They only talk and deal in very specialized ways with particular biological phenomena. As long as the nature of the university is not challenged, it's who it is who's doing things isn't going to help a lot. But I'm hoping we can generate enough of an opposition to this basic system so that instead of everybody being co-opted into it, we can say there's an alternative that would be much better.
Well, first I want to applaud what you seem to be going in the direction of countering the assumption that we should struggle for equality in a system that doesn't really encourage individuality and thinking for ourselves. I sometimes have asked women that if they had the opportunity, would they want to be equal and have equal rights to join the military? And several of them who claimed to be feminists told me yes, because I should have the same rights as men. And I was very disappointed because I thought that was a complete abandonment of the idea of feminism. So I'm really encouraged by what you said. And we have the same phenomena with mainstreaming gay people and assimilation versus our own individuality. Now, to get to my question, you talked about this new vision of economics. I don't remember the name, but I have heard somebody lecture on a concept of barefoot economics, which was local economics. Have you heard of this?
Tell me again what it is.
Barefoot economics.
Barefoot economics. Oh, well, I guess I don't know much about that, but it sounds good. I've heard it.
The other name that came to mind is Amartya Sen.
Yes, yeah. Yes, Amartya Sen is certainly at the fringes of the economic community, and he has a passionate concern for what the dominant economic system is actually doing to human beings. And whether he really has proposed an alternative theory, I'm not as clear. But that he recognizes the damage being done at the present time is very clear. One of the encouraging things is that people from inside the economic community have top people, highly recognized people within the community have been recognizing that the economic system hasn't delivered what they expected it to deliver. That it instead has delivered an extremely skewed income. Maybe you have read the book or heard about the book by Piketty. He is a respected economist, and I think other economists are reading him now. And this could lead to a more serious critical self-criticism within the community. I'm continuing to hope for a radical alternative to the whole economic system of theories based on a fundamentally different model. But of course, there could be improvements even within the present system if they simply recognize that one goal of economics should be a reasonable distribution of the products. That would be an improvement. And they could make proposals that would lead in that direction. They would run counter to what they have been saying. There are fundamental principles in the economic system which say as long as you have growth, it does not matter who gets the extra. And that's the way they've been operating. But maybe they'll change on that. That would be valuable, but it doesn't go to the heart of the matter.
John, before you believe this, it's a Chilean economist who came up with barefoot.
Okay.
Manfred Max Neef, and Borges knows his daughter, and we're trying to get him to come to that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, can you just, in a few sentences, say what direction that goes?
Well, I think it's easier, it's more complicated, but there is a wonderful interview of him by Amy Goodman, that's mathematical resource, and it's a very good, I've seen it before, and essentially what he's talking about is the economy study, over here. Thank you. So Amy Goodman was saying that he won the Right Livelihood Award in 1983, 2 years after the publication of his book, Outside Looking In, Experiences in Barefoot Economics. Economists study and analyze poverty in their nice offices, have all the statistics, make all the models, and are convinced that they know everything that you can know about poverty, but they don't understand poverty. As part of what you were saying, the model is wrong. It's an academic model instead of an existential and practical model. And this one is, because Max Neff has lived among the poor and understands economics from the bottom up.
Thank you.
Will the conference be addressing this issue from various disciplines? I think myself, I come from the field of treating people with addiction, and I'm in recovery myself. And it occurs to me that every discipline and every metaphor that we could bring to this may empower it, because in my impression, in my very small microcosmic view of the world, this is also an issue of addiction, of nothing is never enough, and trying to fill this spiritual hole that exists inside of me with material things that will never fill it.
Yeah.
And in the process, not only do I destroy myself, but I destroy everyone around us.
Obviously, there are many, many angles that the conference won't deal with. We do have several sections that will be talking about various aspects of psychology. We don't have a section specifically on addiction, so that maybe we should have done that. I think if you take addiction in the very broad sense, I would say the great majority of people, once they have been socialized for 8 years into thinking in a particular way, are addicted to thinking in that way, and that's really our problem. I would just give the concrete example. Our book, For the Common Good, did get some attention. It won a national award. It was obviously in the field of economics, but it was almost impossible to get anybody in the field of economics to review it. Because a discussion of the assumptions of economics is not part of the discipline of economics. And therefore, our book was not thought of as belonging to the field of economics. So, okay, then what is it? It's a philosophical book, it's a theological book, but it doesn't belong to anything that a philosopher would recognize as a philosophical book, because philosophy has become linguistic analysis, and that's not what we were doing. I think they are addicted to a particular structure. Theology is vague and confused enough that it would have a better shot in theology than in other things. You see, theology is not accepted as a university discipline, period. If you're not a university discipline, then you can do what you want. But unfortunately, many people teaching theology try to make it more of a university discipline so they could get a little bit of respect. I think that's an addiction too. Yeah. Yes.
I think David is getting at a very good point, which is the addiction to growth, the addiction to consumption, the addiction to more. And an alternative would be something you might call enoughness, or a philosophy of sufficiency.
Yes.
Is anybody talking about that these days?
Oh, yes. There are two books that have been written on the economics of happiness. And then there is a new branch relatively new branch of psychology, which is called positive psychology. And there are studies of what actually makes for happiness, and the realization that there's a somewhat, one of the things that startled me was the discovery that the people of Okinawa are much happier than the people of Japan. Now, we'd always felt a little sorry for the Okinawans. They have to deal with a huge U.S. military base, and they are not nearly as economically prosperous as the people of Japan. To learn that they are happier was quite striking, but it is enoughness. I'll give you one other illustration to support what you're saying. The nation of Thailand, in its desire to become modern and to develop and become a developed nation, invited experts from the United States. Well, the experts studied the situation and said, your main problem is that too many of your people are content. You will have to get rid of your Buddhist priests, and then you may be able to develop. I think that's a backhand way of saying that the Buddhist priests taught them to be satisfied with enough. And they really had succeeded. That is the impressive thing. But, of course, we have to break that because that's not the way of growth. I think we may be ready to do something else. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were right there.
She crept up on him. Well, seeing are there any last questions that somebody has burning on their mind? Yeah. As he takes off from the stage. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and bring this time of our gathering to a close, and I'm going to invite us to go to the patio going out the side door. There's some information again there. Please make sure you do sign up to get more information about the conference itself and to be on the list to get recurring e-newsletters from us, and to know what's going on, and most importantly, how you and I can be not just a part of the problem, but a part of the solution as well. We are incredibly indebted to you, John, for being here, for being a spearheaded of this. And, I just need to share this because this was just so beautiful. In some of his writings about this conference, I'm paraphrasing, as a gift to his grandchildren, he wanted to give this gathering to them, not this one, but the conference coming up, so that there might be a legacy indeed, that they may live in a world that is a different place than it is today. So I thank you, and we all thank you, for thinking about the generations to come, and may we be a part of that change. So thank you, friends, for being here, and enjoy some refreshments, and speak more with John and others, and we look forward to seeing you again in June. Thank you.